Disney's Cruella, a novelization. Chapter 19. Estella stood by her workspace in the warehouse. Her eyes were glued to the board across the room. Pinned smack in the center was her sketch. She had never intended for that design to be seen by the Baroness. It was one of her own, or one of Cruella's. She sometimes couldn't tell who she was when she was in the middle of a design. Either way, when the Baroness had ripped it from the sketchbook, she had claimed it as her own. Estella wasn't sure what irked her more, the fact that the Baroness technically had the right to do that, or the fact that Estella had been foolish enough to put the sketch in such a vulnerable spot in the first place. Hearing angry footsteps, Estella turned to see the Baroness storming into the designer's area. Estella immediately pretended to look intently at the piece of fabric in her hand. "Where's the beading for the dress?" the Baroness barked as she strode past Estella. "Ordered," Estella said. "Just waiting on this idiot delivery man." As the words slipped from her mouth, Estella repressed a gasp. She had accidentally said them in her Cruella voice. The Baroness's steps slowed. Nervously, Estella held her breath, waiting to see if the Baroness had noticed. The woman gave her a look, but then, with a shrug, she moved on. Estella let out her breath again. That had been too close. She had to be more careful. One more slip, and she could give her identity away, and end up ruining her own future, rather than the Baroness's. She spotted Horace, dressed in a delivery man's uniform, wheeling a cart toward her. A box was placed on top. Seeing him, Estella smiled. "Top of the morning, missy," Horace said, greeting her with a ridiculous accent. He nodded at the box. "Got some fashion items, most fashionable." "Thank you, handsome delivery man," she said, earning her a grin from Horace. She had never in her life called him handsome. Glancing around to be sure no one was listening, Horace leaned in. "How you doing?" "Don't break character," she hissed back. Estella knew she had reacted harshly, but she had to know what was at stake. They were in the serpent's lair. At any moment the Baroness could appear. He took a step back, surprised by the venom in her tone. "Me? Break character?" he said. "You called me handsome." Shrugging, he raised his voice back to normal conversational tone and pointed to the box. "All right, missy, there we are. Have a look." Peeling back the box's top with a crowbar, he revealed the contents. Inside, dozens upon dozens of beautiful iridescent beads gleamed and sparkled. Estella sucked in a breath. They were the most beautiful things she had ever seen. Better than she had imagined when she ordered them. They would make any gown shine. And a gown of her design? It would be one of a kind. Lifting her eyes, Estella saw that Horace was also gobsmacked by their beauty. She smiled, her fingers itching to touch them. But sensing someone's eyes on her, she looked up. She saw from inside her office the Baroness staring down at her, her eyes cold and calculating. Estella gulped. Waving Horace off, she turned her attention to the beads. It was time to get to work. Pulling a mannequin over to her space, Estella sat down and started to sew. Soon she was lost in the rhythm of her creativity. The sound of the sewing machines faded away. The chatter became white noise. She didn't notice, as one by one, the other designers packed up their things and headed home that night. Piece by piece, Estella stitched and sewed, weaving bead after iridescent bead into the emerging gown. The sun sank and the stars came out, and still Estella worked. She ignored the late-night cleaning crew, lifting her feet as they swept up the discarded pieces of fabric beneath her. She didn't even acknowledge her own rumbling stomach, or the ache growing between her shoulder blades as she hunched over. She was overcome by the design. She was making something brilliant, something beautiful, something unique. Finally, as the first birds chirped their morning song, Estella sat back. Stretching her arms high over her head, she stared at the gown in front of her. It was the most amazing thing she had ever created. The lines were tight, the stitching invisible. It glimmered and shone under the warehouse lights, almost appearing to come alive. Estella smiled, awash with pride. And now she was going to have to give it to the Baroness. By the time the Baroness and the rest of the design team finally arrived, Estella was nearly asleep on her feet, the late night catching up to her, but upon hearing the Baroness's voice, she snapped to attention. Striding into the designer space, the Baroness made her way to Estella and the gown. She did not speak as she walked around the mannequin. Behind her, Estella saw the other designers come in. Spotting the Baroness and the dress, they began to whisper to each other in awe. Finally, the Baroness stopped her inspection. "Well, I've done it again," she said, giving Estella a look that dared her to defy the statement. "Let's go make history. My best show ever. Estella," she added, gesturing to her, "come with me. I need a drink." "You do?" Estella thought bitterly. "I'm the one who did all this." But she kept her thoughts to herself and instead, with one last look at her gown, followed the woman out to her car. Estella and the Baroness sat in a booth in the back corner of one of London's swankiest restaurants. In front of them, a nervous waiter fumbled with the champagne bottle. Under the Baroness's cold gaze, the waiter's hands shook as he tried to pull the cork, but it would not budge. Growing impatient, the Baroness leaned over and grabbed the bottle. "Give it to me," she snapped. Then in one smooth, well-practiced move, she popped the cork, sending the top flying right into the back of the retreating waiter. The Baroness didn't skip a beat. Pouring herself a glass, she offered one to Estella. "Here's to me," she said, raising the glass. Estella couldn't help it. She laughed. The Baroness shot her a look. "Who else would I drink to?" she asked. "Me?" Estella suggested boldly. "For doing the signature piece?" The Baroness waved the suggestion off. "You're helpful to me, that's all," she said. "As soon as you're not, you're dust." Inspiring talk. Thank you. Estella couldn't help herself. The woman was incorrigible. The sarcasm, however, was lost on the Baroness. "You can't care about anyone else, because everyone is an obstacle," she said. She took a sip of her champagne and went on. "You care about what that obstacle feels or wants, you're dead. If I had cared about anyone, or thing, I might have died, like so many brilliant women, with a drawer full of unseen genius and a heart full of sad bitterness." Estella was surprised. The Baroness actually sounded human. Her next word surprised her even more. "You have the talent for your own label. Whether you have a killer instinct is the big question." "We both know you do," Estella thought, visualizing her mother, but aloud she simply spoke the truth. "I hope I do." The Baroness nodded quickly. "Correct response. Well done," she said. "We just need to lose this Cruella person, don't you think?" "I guess you must hate her," Estella said, hoping her face hadn't flushed at the mention of her alter ego. "Honestly, I'm conflicted," the Baroness answered after a moment. "She is good, bold, and brilliant, but she's made it me or her, so I'm going to have to destroy her." Lifting her glass to her lips, the Baroness leveled her gaze at Estella. Estella shifted in her seat nervously. There was a look in the Baroness's eyes she didn't like. "Cheers," the Baroness said. Clinking her glass against the older woman's, Estella cheered her back. Her hand was steady, but inside she was shaking. Could the Baroness know who she really was? And if she did, what would she do with that knowledge?